I am Ilara Hayes. I am 31 years old, and I live in room 14 of the Crossroads Motel. The room smells like decades of stale cigarette smoke fighting a losing war against industrial cleaner. It is the smell of defeat. The carpet is a nauseating brown swirl, a pattern designed decades ago specifically to hide stains, which means it is now hiding generations of them. The bed, covered in a thin pilled comforter, sags profoundly in the middle, a concave dip of surrender that squeaks with every small movement I make. In the tiny bathroom, the mirror is stained yellow at the edges, casting a jaundiced, sickly light on everything it reflects. This is it. This is what is left. 7 months ago, I had a husband. I had a career. I had a best friend I trusted with my life. Now I am sitting on the edge of that sagging bed, eating my dinner. Instant ramen purchased for less than $2 at the convenience store down the street. I am eating it with a flimsy plastic fork that bends if I stir the noodles too hard. His voice still echoes in the thin-walled room. Liam, my husband, no, my ex-husband. He said I would never rise again. I stare at a crack in the plaster wall, one shaped like a spider web. He said it with such confidence, such finality. He took everything. It happened so fast it felt coordinated. My job, my home, my friends. But the theft that cripples me, the one that wakes me up at night, is the theft of my past. He did not just take my future, he took my sense of reality. How can I trust my own memories? How can I look back on 7 years of laughter, of anniversaries of shared secrets, knowing that every single moment was a performance? The foundation of my entire adult life was quicksand. He erased me. My existence is measured in 7-day increments. Every Tuesday, I walk to the front office. I push a crumpled handful of cash across the counter to pay the weekly rate. The money comes from sporadic, low-paying freelance work, writing social media posts for businesses that pay weeks late. The shame of it is a physical weight, a hot tightness in my chest. The woman at the front desk, Brenda, has a name tag and an expression of profound indifference. She never asks questions. She never offers a kind word. She just takes the cash and slides a receipt under the thick glass. She has seen thousands of women just like me. Women with haunted, desperate eyes clutching duffel bags, pretending this is all just temporary. I am not afraid of starving. The $2 ramen will keep me alive. The fear that grips me is deeper, more absolute. I am terrified that this is it, that this room, this smell, this invisibility is the rest of my life. I am terrified that Liam was right, that I have been permanently erased. This invisibility is worse than poverty. It is a living death. I went from middle-class stability, from worrying about retirement contributions and dinner parties, to rock bottom. It took less than 2 months to dismantle a life I spent a decade building. I avoid the bathroom mirror. I refuse to look at the woman who stares back from that jaundiced glass. She has my face, but her eyes are hollow. They are vacant and defeated in a way that makes me ashamed. I hate her. I hate her for being so stupid. I hate her for being so weak, and most of all, I hate her for being so trusting. I was sitting on that squeaking bed, the plastic fork halfway to my mouth, when I fumbled my phone charger. It clattered to the floor and rolled, disappearing into the dusty darkness under the bed frame. I sighed a sound of pure exhaustion and got down on my hands and knees. Reaching into the grime and dust bunnies, my fingers hit something solid, something that was not the bed frame. I pulled it out. It was a suitcase. Old, battered brown leather with brass corners oxidized to a dull chemical green. It looked like something from another era entirely, a time before plastic wheels and disposable luggage. A simple luggage tag was attached to the handle with a piece of old twine. I turned it over. My full name was written on it, Ilara Marie Hayes. My breath caught in my throat. It was not just my name. It was the handwriting. I would know it anywhere. The precise, careful, slightly backward slanting script of my Aunt Genevieve. My aunt, who had been dead for 9 months. The eccentric family member everyone called difficult and paranoid. The one who showed up at family gatherings with pamphlets about corporate corruption and whispered warnings about trusting the wrong people. A wave of guilt washed over me. I had not visited her enough. I had dismissed her just like everyone else. I had written her off as crazy. How was this here, in this specific room at this specific motel, waiting for me at the absolute lowest point of my life? Had she known I would end up here? The logistics seemed impossible. Did she leave it with Brenda at the front desk with instructions to put it in whatever room I rented? That seemed insane. The suitcase was locked with 2 small brass latches. I turned it over, my heart hammering. Taped to the bottom was a small plastic bag. Inside it was a single small key. Aunt Genevieve, always paranoid but always practical in a way only she understood. My hands were trembling so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key into the lock. I unlocked the latches and lifted the lid. The inside smelled faintly of mothballs and old paper. It was filled with money, bundles of cash held together with simple rubber bands, mostly $100 bills. I pulled out the first stack. My mind could not process it. I started counting, my voice a hoarse whisper in the silent room. 10,000, 20, 50. It was not 70,000. It was $75,000. $75,000 in cash sitting on a bedspread that smelled like bleach. Beneath the money was a printed flight ticket. A one-way ticket to Portland, Oregon. The departure date was 4 days from now, and under the ticket was a single sheet of yellow legal paper folded twice. A handwritten note. I unfolded it. More of her precise script. "Alara," it began. "This is just travel money. The real fortune is waiting at this address." It listed an address in Portland. My eyes scanned down faster and faster. "Do not trust Liam. Do not trust Chloe." My stomach clenched. "They have been planning this since before your wedding." I stopped breathing. The room tilted. Before the wedding. A cold, heavy dread settled in my stomach, far worse than the motel ramen. The note continued. "Your mother's death was not an accident." A small, strangled sound escaped my throat. "Finish what your mother started before they silenced her." My mother, Caroline, died 6 years ago. A car accident on a rainy night. Her car wrapped around a tree on a road she drove every day. The police said she was going too fast, maybe fell asleep. A tragic accident. But Aunt Genevieve had stood at the funeral, gripping my arm, her eyes wide with a frantic energy I had mistaken for grief. She had insisted something was wrong. She told me Mom was investigating financial fraud at the pharmaceutical company where she worked. She said her death was too convenient. We had all dismissed her. We told her she was grieving. We told her she was being paranoid. I sat back on the floor, the yellow paper clutched in my hand. $75,000. A plane ticket. And the truth. Aunt Genevieve had been right. She had been right about everything. She had spent her final years collecting evidence while the rest of us called her crazy. She had left me a choice. I could take this money, disappear, and try to build a new life far away from this all, or I could use it to fight. I looked around the squalid, smoke-stained room. I looked at the plastic fork in the noodle cup. I caught my reflection in the yellowed mirror, the hollow, defeated eyes of the woman staring back. I was done running. I was done being the victim. Aunt Genevieve's letter, clutched in my hand, forced my mind backward. It ripped me from the smelling salt stench of the motel room and plunged me back 7 months into the life I thought was stable. The life I now understood was a meticulously constructed stage, and I was the only person who did not have the script. Our home was a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent building. It was not luxurious. The walls were paper thin, so thin I could hear our neighbors watching television at night, the muffled sound of laugh tracks bleeding into our living room. Mrs. Chin, the older woman down the hall, always smiled and waved when she saw me. It had a worn carpet with stains we could never get out, but it felt like ours. I remembered the long Saturday Liam and I spent painting the living room a soft, neutral gray, laughing as we splattered paint on each other's faces. We spent an entire frustrating weekend assembling flat-pack furniture, the floor littered with tiny screws and Allen keys. We hung our wedding photos on the main wall, the one place where the afternoon light streamed in and made everything look warmer, softer, and more real than it actually was. It felt solid. My job was at Brennan & Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. I was a marketing coordinator, a title that meant I did all the work for none of the credit. It was not the glamorous, high-powered career I had imagined in college, but it was reliable. It paid $48,000 a year, plus benefits. It was enough. It covered my half of the rent, my half of the groceries, with just a little left over for the occasional dinner out, where we pretended we had more disposable income than we did. My boss was Mark Dawson. He was professional but perpetually distant. He was the kind of supervisor who praised your reliability in meetings, but never ever promoted you. He always remembered to ask about your weekend, but his eyes would glaze over before you finished your answer. I had been there for 4 years, receiving the exact same performance review. Alara, you are incredibly reliable. Your consistency is a great asset. That reliability never translated into a raise or a real advancement. I accepted it. I mistook that stagnation for stability. Now holding this letter, I see I was not stable. I was being kept in place. A specific memory surfaces so cold and sharp it makes me nauseous. It was about a year ago. I had stayed up late for a week, fueled by bad break-room coffee, developing a complex social media strategy for a hypothetical client. A passion project I thought was brilliant. I knew it was. I booked a meeting with Mark, my hands shaking, hoping this was the thing that would finally show my initiative, that would finally get me promoted. I presented it to him in his sterile office. He listened, nodding slowly, his face impassive. When I finished, he steepled his fingers. "It's not practical, Alara," he said, his voice flat and final. "It's really outside the scope of what we do here." I deflated instantly. I felt small, foolish, and hopelessly naive for even trying. 3 weeks later, Liam came home bursting through the door. He was carrying a bottle of expensive champagne, the kind we never bought. "We have to celebrate, Alara," he shouted, popping the cork as I jumped. He had just landed a massive new consulting contract, a game changer, he called it. He pulled me into this kitchen, pouring us both a glass, and excitedly described the genius strategy he had presented to the clients. I listened, my smile freezing on my face. He was describing my project, my impractical, outside-the-scope project, detail for detail. The phrasing, the 5-phase rollout plan, the target metrics. It was identical. I remember what I thought in that moment. I actually forced a laugh. "Wow," I said. "Great minds think alike, I guess." I felt a bizarre surge of pride. My husband was brilliant. Of course his clients loved it. Now sitting on this filthy motel floor, I shudder. A cold, violent shudder racks my entire body. Great minds. No. Mark Dawson, my boss, handed my intellectual property to Liam, my husband. Liam took my work, my mind, my labor, and presented it as his own. He collected the credit. He collected the massive bonus. He probably used that bonus to take her Chloe out to a dinner I could not afford. They were not just sleeping together. They were partners in a long-running heist. They were systematically stealing from me, draining my value, mining my mind for profit, long before they decided to liquidate the rest of my life. The collusion was old and deep, and I had stood there sipping champagne, proud of him for it. The memory burns like acid. Liam, my husband. He was a business consultant. It was the perfect vague title, a convenient explanation for his chaotic and demanding schedule. I accepted the late nights, believing he was just finishing proposals. I accepted the sudden last-minute weekend trips to Seattle or San Francisco, believing he was meeting startup founders. He would come home exhausted, give me a distracted kiss on the forehead, heat up whatever leftovers were in the fridge, and fall asleep on the couch with his laptop still open on his chest. I used to cover him with a blanket, feeling a strange mixture of pride that he worked so hard and a quiet loneliness that we had so little time. I thought it was dedication. I now know it was secrecy. He was building a future, just not with me. Our entire foundation was built on that level of deception. We met 7 years ago at a dinner party thrown by mutual friends. That is what I had always believed. Now, holding this letter, I know it was not chance. It was an arrangement. He was charming that night, asking questions about my job and my life, and he actually seemed to listen. He proposed 18 months later, getting down on one knee in the same park where we had our third date. I said yes without hesitation. Every single memory is now poisoned, rewritten as a cold, strategic maneuver. Things had shifted in the last 2 years. They were subtle changes, the kind you notice, but convince yourself are just the normal, boring static of a long-term relationship. He became intensely protective of his phone, angling the screen away from me when I walked past. He started taking calls in the other room, closing the door behind him. He started picking fights over the smallest, most ridiculous things, like the way I loaded the dishwasher, or ironically, how much time I spent talking to Chloe. And then Chloe, my best friend, my sister since our days in the college dorm, surviving on instant ramen and shared dreams. She was my maid of honor. She stood next to me at the altar, wearing the lavender dress we had spent weeks picking out, and she cried during the ceremony. Real convincing crocodile tears. Every Thursday night for 5 years was our ritual. She would come over with a bottle of wine, and we would sit on my couch. I told her everything. I trusted her implicitly. I told her my deepest fears, my career frustrations. I confided in her that I felt Liam pulling away, that I was terrified we were drifting apart. She would nod her face, a perfect mask of empathy. "Oh, Ilara," she would say, rubbing my back. "All marriages go through phases. It is completely normal." She did not just listen. She actively managed my perception. "You are so lucky to have Liam. He is so steady, so supportive. Most men are not like that, you know. You should not take what you have for granted." She made me feel guilty for my own intuition. She made me feel ungrateful for questioning the very things that were in fact true. A memory surfaces now, hitting me with the force of a physical blow. About 6 months before I caught them, I was desperate to fix us. I secretly booked a romantic weekend away, a non-refundable expensive stay at a beautiful coastal inn. I wanted to surprise him, to get us away from the city, away from our phones. I told only one person, Chloe. I gushed to her about it on our Thursday night, detailing my hopes for the trip. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, Liam came home, his face a mask of regret. An emergency meeting had just come up, a massive client in San Francisco. He could not possibly get out of it. He had to go. I was crushed. I pleaded. I reminded him it was non-refundable. We had a terrible, explosive fight. He turned it around on me, painting me as frivolous and stupid for spending money we did not have, for not understanding the pressure he was under. I ended up apologizing to him. That night I called Chloe, crying, explaining how foolish I felt. She was a predictable river of sympathy. "Oh, honey," she cooed, "he is just working so hard. Do not take it personally." I stare at the cracking plaster of the motel room. The dots connect with sickening, brutal clarity. I told Chloe. Chloe told Liam. She was not just a passive confidant. She was an active saboteur. She was a gatekeeper, feeding him my plans so he could perfectly counter them. She was his accomplice, ensuring that any attempt I made to reconnect would be systematically, painfully thwarted. She held my hand and validated my pain, all while she was the one twisting the knife. Aunt Genevieve's letter was a physical anchor, but my mind was adrift, pulled back by an irresistible tide to that day. 6 months ago, the day my life ended. It began with nausea. I woke up that Tuesday morning feeling sick to my stomach. It was not the flu. It was not bad food. It was a deep, coiling wrongness in my chest, a sense of dread so profound it made it difficult to take a full breath. Liam was asleep beside me, or pretending to be. He had come in late, muttering about a client dinner. I tried to ignore the feeling. I went through the motions: shower, toast I could not finish. I got dressed for work while he snored softly, an image of peaceful domesticity that now seems grotesque. By 10 o'clock that morning, I was sitting at my desk at Brennan & Associates, staring at a social media content calendar for a dental office. I was trying to think of a cheerful caption for a post about root canals. My hands were cold. The nausea was worse. The feeling of wrongness was suffocating me. I could not focus. I could not be there. Finally, I walked into Mark Dawson's office. "Mark," I said, my voice sounding thin. "I'm not feeling well. I need to go home." I braced myself for the pushback. Mark was not the kind of boss who appreciated unscheduled departures. He valued reliability, which was his code for constant presence. But he did not push back. He just looked at me. And his expression was not one of sympathy. It was not concern. It was something else I could not read at the time, a guarded, blank, almost satisfied look. "Feel better, Alara," he said. His tone. That is what I remember most. It sent a chill right up my spine, making the hair on my neck stand up. It was not the tone of a boss dismissing a sick employee. It was the tone of relief. It was the tone of someone who knew something I did not. It was the tone of a co-conspirator who was glad I was leaving the board. The drive home took 20 minutes. I drove in complete silence, the radio off. Any noise felt like an assault. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just a stomach bug, amplified by anxiety. But the dread grew with every block, a certainty that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. I pulled into the parking lot of our building, and I saw it, parked in a visitor spot near the front entrance. A silver Honda Civic, Chloe's car. My heart did not just drop. It slammed against my ribs hard like a fist. I sat in my car for a full minute, the engine still running, my mind racing, cycling through a dozen desperate, innocent explanations. Her internet is down. She works from our place sometimes. She has a key. Maybe Liam came home sick too. She is just checking on him. Maybe they are planning a surprise party for me. A promotion. An anniversary. Any reason. Any desperate, flimsy, pathetic reason other than the one that was screaming at me from my gut. I finally turned off the engine. My legs felt like lead as I walked across the parking lot up the 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken again. I walked down the familiar worn carpet of the hallway. I reached my door. I put my key in the lock, turning it as quietly as I possibly could. I could not have said why. Why was I being stealthy in my own home? I stepped inside the apartment. It was quiet, but it was not the empty, echoing quiet I was used to from a workday afternoon. It was an occupied silence, a stillness that felt heavy and thick with presence. I stood in the small foyer, my work bag still digging into my shoulder, listening. And then I heard it. Laughter. Coming from our bedroom. Our bedroom. It was Chloe's laugh. I recognized it instantly. But it was not her normal breezy laugh, the one I heard over wine. This was different. It was low, private, and intimate. A sickening wave of recognition washed over me. I had heard this laugh before, years ago, back in college. It was the laugh she used when she won something, the specific throaty sound of contempt and victory she made when she successfully stole a guy that another girl in the dorm liked. It was the sound of her looking down on someone else's loss. I stood frozen in my own living room, staring at the closed bedroom door. My brain screamed at me, "Do not open it. If you do not open the door, it is not real. You can turn around right now, go back to your car, go to a coffee shop. Come home at 6 o'clock like you always do, and your life will still be intact." But I knew. Beneath the desperate, frantic denial, I already knew. My feet felt like cement as I crossed the living room. I did not knock. Why would I knock on my own bedroom door? I just turned the handle and pushed it open. They were there. Liam and Chloe. In my bed, tangled in the gray cotton sheets that I had just washed 3 days earlier, the ones Liam and I spent an entire afternoon picking out. Liam's shirt was thrown carelessly over the floor lamp I had bought at the flea market. And the smell. My God, the smell. It hit me like a physical force. A grotesque mix of my perfume from the vanity, her cloyingly sweet perfume, and the unmistakable sour tang of sweat. When they saw me standing in the doorway, the first emotion that crossed Chloe's face was not shame. It was not guilt. It was pure, unadulterated annoyance, as if I was the interruption, as if I was the maid who had walked in at an inconvenient time. She did not scramble to cover herself. She just stared at me, her expression hardening. Liam got out of bed and pulled on his jeans. He did it with a practiced mechanical efficiency that told me this was not the first time. This was not a mistake. This was routine. He looked at me, and his expression was somehow worse than guilt. It was impatience mixed with an almost imperceptible flicker of relief. The charade was over. "Elara," he said, and his voice was calm. It was that infuriating calm voice he always used when he thought I was being hysterical. "We need to talk about this like adults. This is not what it looks like." The absolute stunning absurdity of that sentence, "This is not what it looks like," almost made me laugh out loud. It was exactly, precisely, unequivocally what it looked like. 7 years. 7 years of my life, of my trust, of my love. And this was the lie he offered. He could not even respect me enough to invent a better one. Chloe sat up, pulling the sheet around herself with an insulting show of modesty. She had the nerve to look at me with pity. "We did not want you to find out this way, Elara," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, as if there was a good way. "But honestly," she continued, "this has been coming for a long time. You had to know things were not working between you two." The presumption of it stole my breath. The audacity. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I just turned around, my body numb, and walked back into the living room. I yanked my duffel bag from the hall closet and started throwing things into it. My laptop, chargers, my toothbrush, the practical essential things you need when your world has just imploded. Liam followed me, still shirtless, his jeans unbuttoned. "Elara, stop being dramatic," he started. "We can discuss this." He was still trying to manage me, still trying to have his adult conversation. I walked into our bedroom closet, right past Chloe, who was still sitting in my bed, and grabbed the most expensive thing he owned. His black Armani suit, the one he wore to meet his biggest clients. I walked back out and threw it directly at his face. "You want to talk like adults, Liam?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Then start by putting on some damn clothes." I zipped the duffel bag. I walked out of the apartment, out of the building, and got into my car. I drove 3 miles, pulling into the parking lot of a 24-hour coffee shop. I sat there in the anonymity of the midday traffic, and I cried until I could not breathe, until my throat was raw and my head was pounding. Then I picked up my phone and called my cousin Maya. I had been living on Maya's couch for 5 days, 5 agonizing days of pretending. I was still going to work every morning, a bizarre act of self-preservation. I would wake up at 6 before Maya and her husband Ryan showered quickly and put on one of the 3 professional outfits I had managed to grab. I was trying to maintain a fragile grip on normalcy. If I just kept going to my desk, if I just kept earning my paycheck, maybe I could convince myself that only half of my life had been incinerated. The other half, the professional part, was still stable. The call came on Sunday night. It was Mark Dawson. His voice on the phone had that specific, careful and hollow tone, the one people use when they are about to deliver bad news and want to signal their own performative compassion in advance. "Elara," he said, "can you come to my office first thing tomorrow morning, say 8:15? My stomach tightened. I agreed, my voice a weak imitation of my normal one. I told myself it was about a new client. I told myself it was a performance review. I refused to let my mind consider the alternative. I showed up at 8:15 on the dot. I had used Maya's iron, making sure my clothes were crisp. I wanted to look composed, professional, put together. The office was still quiet. Mark's door was open. He waved me in with an expression that was not quite sympathy, but a strained, uncomfortable mask. "Elara." He began, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. He shuffled some papers, not quite meeting my eyes. My stomach dropped before he even spoke. "I need to talk to you about some changes happening in the department." He used that sterile corporate language, the kind designed to make human devastation sound like a business efficiency. "We are restructuring the marketing department due to budget constraints. Unfortunately, your position is being eliminated." He slid a thick folder across the polished wood of his desk toward me. "We are offering a severance package that should help with the transition." I just stared at the folder. I did not touch it. "Budget constraints," I repeated. My voice sounded hollow, distant, like it was coming from someone else. "We just signed 3 new clients last month. I have seen the quarterly reports. We are not struggling financially." Mark's expression did not change. "These decisions are made at levels above my control, Elara," he said, finally looking directly at me. His eyes were cold, devoid of any real empathy. "I am sorry, but the decision is final." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him if this had anything to do with Liam. I wanted to ask if my personal humiliation was now a professional liability. But something in his face stopped me. It was a flicker of profound discomfort, a sudden anxious shift that told me asking questions was useless. He had his script. It would only make this more awkward. The decision was indeed final. I stood up, my legs shaking. I took the folder. "I will get my things," I said. I walked back to my desk, my entire body numb. I packed up 4 years of my professional life in less than 20 minutes. My favorite coffee mug, a small framed photo of my mother, my notebooks filled with ideas. My coworkers, people I had eaten lunch with and shared stories with for years, suddenly became intensely interested in their computer screens. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody said goodbye. I was no longer Alara. I was a problem. By 9 o'clock in the morning, I was walking out of the building for the last time, carrying a small cardboard box. I sat in my car in the parking lot, the box on the passenger seat. The first pillar, my marriage, had been kicked out. Now the second pillar, my career, was gone. I was in complete freefall. The ground had shifted beneath me again, just as I was trying to regain my balance. It was only much, much later, long after I found Aunt Genevieve's files, that I discovered the final sickening piece of the puzzle. Mark Dawson and Liam Walker had been college roommates. Their connection was not just professional. It was old. It was deep. My job at Brennan and Associates, the job I thought I had earned, had never been secure. It had been arranged. It was conditional all along. Conditional on me remaining useful to the people whose agendas I did not understand. I was useful to Mark as a reliable workhorse, and I was useful to Liam as an unsuspecting wife whose boss was his old friend. I sat in that car gasping for air as I suddenly terribly understood Mark's expression from the day I went home sick. That look of relief, his voice. "Feel better, Alara." He knew. He must have known. Liam must have told him the affair was happening, that a confrontation was imminent. Mark was not just letting me go home. He was relieved I was leaving, relieved I was walking into the explosion. He was just waiting for the fallout. He was waiting for the excuse to cut me loose to finalize the coordinated demolition of my life. The firing was not a consequence of the affair. It was part of it. It was the second stage of a meticulously planned detonation. The divorce proceedings started just 2 weeks after Mark Dawson fired me. Liam moved with a surgical blinding speed. He hired Victoria Blackwood, an attorney whose name was whispered in fear in legal circles, a woman known for her strategic cruelty and her ability to win cases through sheer procedural aggression. I, on the other hand, had no job, no income, and no savings. I was assigned a court-appointed lawyer, a tired, rumpled man named Arthur Vance. He was in his late 50s, his suit smelled faintly of mothballs, and he looked at me over the top of his reading glasses with an air of profound resignation. He seemed to have given up on the concept of justice sometime during the previous decade, and was now just going through the motions until retirement. The power imbalance was staggering. It was a shark versus a goldfish. Victoria Blackwood did not waste a single second. Her strategy was not just to defeat me, but to annihilate me. She filed motions immediately painting me not as a wronged wife, but as a woman who was fundamentally unstable, irresponsible, and potentially dangerous. My new vulnerable circumstances were the exact weapons she needed. The fact that I had just lost my job was twisted and presented as evidence of an inability to function as a responsible adult. The fact that I was temporarily sleeping on my cousin Maya's couch was used as proof that I could not manage my own life. Every single detail of my current desperate situation became ammunition. She was arguing that I was not entitled to a single asset from the marriage because I was clearly too hysterical and incompetent to be trusted with them. The hearing itself was a blur of calculated humiliation. We stood before Judge Philip Monroe. He was a man in his late 50s who ran his courtroom with a brisk, impatient efficiency, a clear sign that he had already made his decisions long before hearing any testimony. And he clearly had. Victoria Blackwood, sharp and commanding in a severe navy suit, would make a motion. Judge Monroe would approve it with a swift, decisive bang of his gavel. My lawyer Arthur would shuffle his papers, stand up slowly, and make a feeble request on my behalf. The judge would deny it, barely glancing up from his screen. It was not a hearing. It was a well-rehearsed execution. The ruling was brutal and final. Liam kept our apartment. His name was listed first on the mortgage, and that was all that mattered. The fact that I had contributed equally to the down payment and every single monthly payment for 5 long years was deemed irrelevant. He kept our car. I had missed 2 payments during the chaotic, agonizing weeks following my job loss, and that was all the justification Victoria Blackwood needed to have it declared solely his. He kept the furniture we had bought together. He kept the joint savings account we had built together, draining it completely. He kept the retirement funds I had so diligently contributed to for years. The final settlement left me with my clothing, my personal laptop, and just enough money from my final paycheck to cover perhaps 3 months of rent at the cheapest, most run-down apartment I could find. I sat there at the table, my hands numb, my entire body hollow. I stared at the polished wood grain, trying to process the fact that my entire life had just been legally erased. Arthur Vance. My lawyer patted my hand in a clumsy, awkward gesture of comfort. "This is the best we could do under the circumstances, Elara," he whispered, already gathering his worn-out briefcase, eager to move on to his next lost cause. "The best we could do." In that moment, staring at the back of Liam's perfectly tailored suit as he shook Victoria Blackwood's hand, I realized the cold, horrifying truth. The system was not designed to protect me. It was not broken. It was working exactly as intended. It was not designed to find justice. It was designed to process me. It was designed to clean up the mess. Liam Articulate, employed, wealthy, and flanked by an expensive, predatory lawyer, was a person the system understood. He fit. He spoke their language. He was the picture of stability. I, the unemployed, emotionally devastated, weeping woman sleeping on a relative's couch, was just a problem to be filed away. I was the hysteria. I was the mess. I was the liability. They were not listening to my truth. They were just tidying me up. I had done everything right my entire life. I had worked hard. I had paid my bills on time. I had trusted the right people. I had been a good wife, a good employee, a good friend. I had played by all the unwritten rules of middle-class respectability. And in the end, none of it mattered. Not one single bit. The financial devastation was a gut punch, but it was not the killing blow. The true devastation, the part that hollowed me out completely and left me as a walking shell, was not losing the apartment or the car. It was watching Chloe Reed take the stand. Victoria Blackwood, Liam's shark of a lawyer, called her as a character witness. Against me. She walked to the stand, her posture perfect, her expression a mask of somber reluctance. She was wearing a navy blue designer suit. It was sharp, impeccably tailored, and expensive. I recognized it instantly. My vision blurred, the courtroom dissolving, and I was suddenly thrown back in time 2 years earlier. We were in the dressing room at Nordstrom, laughing, surrounded by a pile of clothes. She had tried on that exact suit. I remembered her turning in front of the 3-way mirror, a rare, serious look on her face. "I need this one," she had said, her voice firm. "I have a really, really important interview, something life-changing. I need to look trustworthy." I had told her it made her look powerful and professional. I was the one who encouraged her to buy it. I sat frozen at the defense table, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Oh God, a life-changing interview. Trustworthy. Was this the job? Was her interview with Meridian Pharmaceuticals? Was she auditioning for the role of Elara Hayes' best friend, the spy assigned to monitor me? I had stood in that store sipping a complimentary latte and helped my best friend choose the uniform for my own execution. She sat in the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Then she folded her hands in her lap, looked at Judge Philip Monroe with an expression of profound, tearful sadness, and she began to lie. She lied with a practiced, chilling conviction. The emotional calibration was perfect. She told the judge that I had been unstable for months, that my behavior had become erratic and worrying long before the separation. Then she delivered the first killing blow. She started making... Chloe paused, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. She started making concerning comments about self-harm. She said things that really worried me. Arthur, my lawyer, just scribbled on his yellow legal pad. That is a lie I wanted to scream. But it was not. Not entirely. It was worse. It was a grotesque distortion of the truth. I remembered. My mind flashed to a specific Thursday night months ago after my third glass of wine. I had confessed to her, my best friend, how hopeless I felt. I told her I felt so disconnected from Liam, so invisible and alone, that some mornings I did not want to wake up. It was not a plan. It was not a threat. It was a cry for help, whispered in the dark, a moment of profound, vulnerable, and agonizing trust. And she had stored it. She had cataloged my pain, saved it like a receipt, and was now presenting it in a court of law as evidence of my insanity. She was not finished. She became increasingly paranoid. Chloe continued dabbing at a non-existent tear with a tissue. She was very difficult to be around. She was constantly accusing Liam of cheating on her. It was obsessive. It was all she would talk about. He stayed with her out of obligation, out of fear, not love. And there it was, the final twisting betrayal that locked everything into place. My blood did not just run cold, it froze. I asked her. I was the one who had come to her drowning in anxiety and intuition and asked, "Am I crazy? Am I just being paranoid? I feel like he is pulling away." And she was the one. She was the one who looked me right in the eye, squeezed my hand and said, "Elara, all marriages go through phases. You need to trust him. You are imagining things. He is a good guy." She actively, deliberately, and repeatedly reassured me. She gaslit me, telling me my correct intuition was paranoia. And now she was sitting in a court of law under oath, using the very paranoia she helped create as a weapon to destroy my credibility. She had collected my deepest fears for years, and now she was presenting them as character flaws. Judge Philip Monroe listened with a look of deep paternal concern. He nodded sympathetically at her. He pushed the box of tissues on his bench closer to her when her fake sobs became more pronounced. My lawyer, Arthur Vance, finally stood up, shuffling his papers. "Your Honor, I must ask Ms. Reed about the nature of her own relationship with Mr. Walker." Before he could even finish the question, Victoria Blackwood was on her feet. "Objection," she boomed. "Relevance. This is a desperate attempt at character assassination. Sustained." Judge Monroe snapped his voice sharp for the first time, cutting off the only line of inquiry that mattered. I sat at the defendant's table, my body numb, my ears ringing. I was watching my best friend of more than a decade systematically dismantle what was left of my life. And I understood. This was not a messy divorce. This was not a simple, tragic affair. This was coordinated. The affair, the firing from Mark Dawson, and this calculated theatrical performance in the courtroom. It was all timed. It was all executed with a precision that went far beyond coincidence. I was not just being betrayed. I was being systematically, professionally, and legally destroyed. After the courtroom, I was a ghost. Maya picked me up, her eyes wide with a mixture of pity and horror, and drove me to her apartment. She set me up on the living room couch with a clean blanket and a pillow. "Stay as long as you need, Elara," she promised, rubbing my shoulder. "You are family." I stayed for 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, I was a ghost in her living room, existing in the margins of her marriage, trying to make myself as small and silent as possible. I would wait until she and her husband Ryan left for work before I would use the shower. I spent my days searching for freelance work on her Wi-Fi, my laptop balanced on my knees. Then the tension started. It was subtle at first. Ryan's greetings became clipped. The air in the small apartment grew heavy. One night I was pretending to be asleep on the couch, the blanket pulled up to my chin. Their bedroom door was closed, but the walls were thin. I heard them arguing. "She cannot stay here indefinitely, Maya." Ryan's voice was a low, frustrated rumble. You are not helping her by letting her avoid her situation. She is not avoiding it, Ryan. She just needs support. She is going through a trauma. Maya's voice was tired, strained, the supportive edge I loved about her worn thin. I know, I get that. But Maya... Ryan paused, and his next words froze the blood in my veins. I spoke to Liam today. There was a sharp silence. You what? He called me, Ryan said, his voice defensive. He called my office. He said he was worried about you, about us. He said Alara is extremely unstable. He said she is threatening to sue everyone, talking about wild conspiracies. He said he is genuinely worried for your physical safety. I lay there, my eyes wide open in the dark, my body rigid. It was not enough for him to take my home, my money, and my job. He was actively, systematically poisoning the tiny patch of earth I had left to stand on. He was taking my sanity. He was using the exact lies that Chloe had practiced and perfected on the stand, the unstable and paranoid narrative, and he was feeding it to the last person on earth who had offered me a safe place to sleep. This was not fallout. This was a campaign. This was the final coordinated step, total, absolute isolation. That is ridiculous, Ryan, Maya snapped, but the exhaustion in her voice told me she was losing. That is him talking. That is the man who betrayed her. Is it? Ryan shot back. She is talking about conspiracies, Maya. You have heard her. She is not herself. I knew in that moment I had to leave. I was no longer just a friend in need. I was a liability. I was a wedge, and I was splitting their marriage apart. I left the next morning lying that I had a promising lead on a roommate situation. The rapid, humiliating descent began. I became a nomad surfing a network of expiring sympathy. My former colleague, Olivia Grant, took me in next. Of course, Alara, stay as long as you need. 10 days later, her entire demeanor shifted. Ilara? She said, wringing her hands, unable to meet my eyes. I love you, but your energy, it is just so negative right now. I am an empath and I really need to protect my own mental health. I was kicked out politely for being too sad. Next was a friend from college. She let me sleep on her floor for 5 days. Then her roommate complained. She said she is just not comfortable having a stranger in the apartment, my friend explained, her face flushed with shame. Especially one who is not... paying rent. I understood. I finally understood in a way that was deeper and more painful than the legal betrayal. Everyone was sympathetic right up until the moment my tragedy became their inconvenience. Compassion has an expiration date. It lasts exactly as long as it does not require any actual sustained sacrifice. I was no longer Ilara, their friend. I was a crisis. I was a problem to be solved, a burden to be passed along. And everyone I learned was running out of time. After the last couch, there was nowhere left to go. The friend from college had looked at me with that awful, agonizing blend of pity and impatience. I spent 3 nights in my car parked in a well-lit grocery store parking lot until the September cold became too much to bear. I scraped together every cent I had left from the sporadic, humiliating freelance work I had managed to find online. Writing email newsletters for a local bakery, managing the Facebook page for a pet grooming business. The payments arrived weeks late in insulting little trickles. It amounted to $200. I drove to the only place where $200 could buy me a week of shelter. The Crossroads Motel. It sat off Highway 52, a long, flat, faded blue building that looked like it had absorbed every sad story that had ever passed through it. The sign out front was missing letters buzzing a low, sickly neon orange. The woman at the front desk was behind thick bulletproof glass. Her name tag said Brenda. She looked at me, at my single duffel bag, and at my desperate, hollowed-out eyes with an expression of profound, bottomless indifference. She had seen me this exact woman 1,000 times before. I was not a tragedy to her. I was just a Tuesday. Weekly rate, I said. My voice was a dry croak. She nodded, not speaking. She just pushed a small metal tray under the glass. I pushed my crumpled bills into it. She took my cash, handed me a key, attached to a faded green plastic tag, and recited the rules in a flat, monotone voice that had lost all meaning. Checkout is 11, no visitors after 10 o'clock. Laundry room is around back, costs $3 a load. Vending machines take bills or coins. I thanked her and walked across the cracked pavement to the door. Room 14. The key stuck in the lock, and I had to jiggle it hard before the mechanism finally gave way. I pushed the door open, and the smell of old smoke and industrial cleaner hit me like a wall. As I stepped inside and dropped my bag on the floor, a strange, unexpected, and powerful feeling washed over me. It was relief. This room was a pit of despair. The carpet was a brown pattern designed to hide stains. The bed sagged in the middle, a testament to failure. The mirror in the tiny bathroom made my skin look yellow and sick. But this room in its absolute unapologetic squalor was honest. Brenda at the front desk was not pretending to care. This motel was not offering me temporary sympathy that would expire the second I became inconvenient. It was a transaction. This was the bottom. And at least the bottom was solid. At least this ground, this filthy, stained ground, would not shift beneath my feet again. I had to establish a routine, a way to mark time, so I would not dissolve completely. Mornings were for the job search. I sat on the edge of the sagging bed, my laptop balanced on my knees, and I applied for jobs online. Marketing coordinator, social media manager, anything. I sent out dozens of applications every week. I customized cover letters. I sent my resume once so full of promise into the digital void. Nobody called back, not one, not even an automated rejection email. Afternoons were for survival. I would find whatever tiny freelance projects I could, writing posts for that pet grooming business. Small, demeaning tasks that paid just enough to cover my next weekly motel bill with a few dollars left over for food. Evenings were for instant ramen. I would sit on the bed watching mindless game shows on the ancient television. I did not care about the shows. I just needed the noise. I needed any sound at all to drown out the silence, to fill the room with something other than the looping echo of my own failure. My neighbors were ghosts. There was Mike, a long-haul trucker who parked his rig in the far corner of the lot. We would nod at each other, two ships passing in the night, but we never spoke. There was a woman in the room next to mine who worked the night shift at the local hospital and kept her curtains permanently drawn. We were a community of the invisible, all of us, just trying to get through to the next sunrise. This was my life now. This was it. A room that smelled like failure meals that cost less than $2, and the crushing absolute understanding that nobody was coming to save me. They had won. Liam, Chloe, Mark. They had taken everything, and this was what was left. I had accepted it. I had stopped fighting. I was just existing. And that is where I was sitting on that sagging bed, resigned to my new life when I dropped my phone charger. I sat on the floor of room 14. The familiar acrid smell of old smoke and chemical bleach was still there, but for the first time I no longer noticed it. Spread out on the filthy brown swirl of the carpet was my new reality. $75,000 in bundled cash, a one-way plane ticket, and the single sheet of yellow legal paper from Aunt Genevieve. The shock, that paralyzing cold fog that had filled my head for months, was finally receding. It was burning away. In its place, something new and hard was beginning to form. It was not hope. It was a cold, quiet, and intensely focused rage. I looked at the letter again, the precise handwriting a stark contrast to the chaos it described. They have been planning this since before your wedding. Your mother's death was not an accident. It was not a theory. It was a statement of fact. And like a key turning in a lock, I never knew existed, every fragmented, confusing, and painful event of the last 7 years suddenly slammed into horrifying focus. Liam's practiced convincing lies, Chloe's theatrical, tearful testimony on the stand, Mark Dawson's strange, unconcealed look of relief when he fired me, Judge Philip Monroe's openly biased, dismissive gavel that had stripped me of my life. It was not a string of terrible luck. It was not a messy, complicated affair. It was a coordinated attack. It was a systematic demolition. All of them. They were all connected. My eccentric, difficult Aunt Genevieve, the woman our entire family had dismissed as paranoid, was not paranoid. She was the only one in the entire world who had seen the truth. She had given me two choices: disappear or fight. I looked at the stacks of cash. $75,000. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I could take it. I could take that money, walk out of this motel, get on a bus, and just go. I could change my name. I could go to some small, quiet town in the middle of nowhere, rent a small apartment, get a simple job, and just be. Live quietly. No one, not a single person on earth, could blame me for choosing survival. After what they had done, no one would fault me for just wanting peace. But I knew with an absolute and crushing certainty that I would never sleep again. I would spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, flinching at shadows. It would not be living. It would be a different kind of prison. It would be running. "I am not running," I whispered. My voice was hoarse. I looked at my hollow-eyed reflection in the yellowed bathroom mirror. I was done being the person things happened to. I was done being the victim. They had worked so hard to destroy Alara Hayes, the trusting, naive, reliable wife, and they had succeeded. She was gone. But they had made a fatal, arrogant error. They did not realize that in destroying her, they had created something else from the wreckage. Something cold, something focused, and something far more dangerous. I stood up. My movements were no longer tired. They were sharp and precise. I grabbed my duffel bag from the corner and emptied its meager contents onto the sagging bed. I carefully bundled the $75,000, wrapped the stacks in the few t-shirts I owned, and buried them in the bottom of the bag. I packed my laptop, its charger, and my toiletries on top. I left the room, leaving the plastic key on the nightstand. At the front desk, I slid a $5 bill under the glass, along with a note saying I had paid through the week but would not be returning. Brenda was there watching me, her face impassive as always. I turned and walked toward the door, my bag slung over one shoulder. "Good luck," she said. Her voice was flat, but I stopped. I turned and looked at her. Her eyes were not indifferent. They were knowing. And for the first time, I truly believed she meant it. I took a cab to the airport, paying with the last of my hoarded freelance money. I walked to the ticket counter and bought my ticket to Portland, paying with crisp $100 bills from Aunt Genevieve's stack. The flight was on a budget carrier, and I was wedged into a middle seat between a large businessman who immediately fell asleep on my shoulder and a college kid watching videos on his phone without headphones. I did not sleep. I could not. I clutched the duffel bag on my lap with both arms, a physical anchor in the vibrating cabin. My mind was on fire. It was cycling through 1,000 questions, each one more agonizing than the last. What did my mother discover that made her dangerous enough to kill? How deep was Liam's involvement? How deep was Chloe's? Was any part of my 7-year marriage real? Any part? Was there a single genuine laugh? A single honest kiss? Or had every single moment been a performance? Portland greeted me with a cold, driving rain. It was different from the rain back home. It was heavier, more relentless, a gray sheet of water that seeped into everything. It matched my mood perfectly. I went to the rental car counter. I used more of the cash to rent a small, unremarkable sedan. The agent barely looked at me. I was just another transaction. I got in the car, the windshield wipers thumping a low, rhythmic beat, and I pulled up the address from Aunt Genevieve's letter on my phone. The GPS guided me out of the city, away from the urban noise, and into the quiet, wealthy enclave of Lake Oswego. The rain was still falling, a relentless cold drizzle that matched the gray landscape. The streets were lined with enormous mature trees, their branches heavy with water, creating a dark canopy. The houses were large, set far back from the road, protected by privacy hedges, and an air of quiet money. Aunt Genevieve's address was at the end of a small, forgotten cul-de-sac. Her house was the exception to the neighborhood's pristine condition. It was a small, unassuming ranch-style home built in the 1970s and seemingly untouched since. The windows were dark. The lawn had exploded into a wild, overgrown meadow with grass reaching heights that suggested it had not been mowed in many months. Weeds pushed defiantly through the cracks in the driveway. The entire property screamed neglect, a quiet monument of decay. It looked exactly like what it was, a place where someone had died alone, and nobody knew what to do with it yet. I parked in the cracked driveway and sat in the rental car, the engine ticking as it cooled. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. A sudden paralyzing wave of fear washed over me. I had come all this way running on adrenaline and a cold, hard rage. But now sitting in front of this silent, dead house, I hesitated. What if the truth was worse than the lies? What if what I found inside this house did not bring clarity, but a new, deeper kind of horror? What if I found out my entire life, even my childhood, was built on something rotten? What if I was not strong enough to handle what was inside? I sat there for a full minute, my mind screaming at me to just drive away, take the money, disappear. No. I turned off the engine. I was done running. Aunt Genevieve had thought of everything. Taped inside the suitcase was a small envelope marked house. Inside was the front door key. I let myself in. The air inside was stale and thick, smelling of dust-old paper and the undisturbed stillness of a place where no one had lived or breathed in months. The interior was exactly as the family legend had described it. Books were everywhere, stacked on every surface, piled on tables, and lined up along the baseboards. And filing cabinets. There were 4 tall metal filing cabinets in the living room, right where a normal person would put a couch. The kitchen looked like it had barely been used, but the note had been specific. Not in the house. Go to the shed. I walked through the small, cluttered house to the back door. I stepped out into an overgrown wild yard. The shed sat in the far corner, a simple windowless structure, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, and I saw it immediately. The jarring, unmistakable contrast. While the house was old and rotting, the shed door was pristine. It was secured with 2 heavy brand-new industrial-grade locks. This was not where she kept a lawnmower. This was where she kept her secrets. I used the 3rd key from the suitcase, this one marked shed. The heavy lock clicked open smoothly. I pulled the door open and stepped inside. The interior was the complete opposite of the house. It was obsessively perfectly organized. Filing cabinets lined one entire wall, each drawer labeled with precise typed labels. Boxes were stacked neatly indexed by year. And in the back corner, partially hidden under a dusty tarp and a few strategically placed cans of old paint, there was a trap door set into the floor. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I moved the paint cans and pulled back the tarp. The trap door had a heavy-duty handle and one more lock, a high-security deadbolt. I used the 4th and final key. It turned. I pulled the handle and the heavy door lifted, revealing a sturdy wooden ladder descending into absolute darkness. I turned on my phone's flashlight and aimed it down. I climbed down, rung by rung, into the cool, dry air below. When my feet touched the concrete floor, a motion sensor was triggered. A string of battery-powered LED strips flickered on, illuminating the space. I was standing in a converted crawl space. It was about 7 feet tall, the walls lined with insulation and vapor barrier. It was a climate-controlled secret evidence room. A dehumidifier hummed quietly in the corner. More filing cabinets, more indexed boxes. And in the center, a simple folding table. My heart was pounding. This was it. This was the real fortune. Aunt Genevieve had spent the last years of her life, while everyone called her paranoid, building this, a secret underground archive. I started with the items on the table. They were laid out, protected in clear plastic sleeves, like evidence in a trial that was waiting to happen. I picked up the first one. It was a photograph. My hand started to shake so violently, I almost dropped it. It was my mother, Caroline. She was smiling, holding a drink, standing at what looked like a conference. And standing on either side of her, also smiling, also holding drinks, were Liam and Chloe. They all wore name tags. I squinted, my heart hammering against my ribs. A banner was visible in the background, partially obscured, but the words were clear. Meridian Pharmaceuticals, Annual Research Summit. My blood turned to ice. At the bottom of the photograph, a small white border held a date printed in blue digital numbers. 8 years ago. 8 years ago. My mind, which had felt so numb and slow, suddenly fractured, running 1,000 calculations a second. 8 years. That was 2 full years before I had supposedly met Liam by chance at that dinner party. 2 years before my love story began. My entire 7-year history with him rewound in my head, but now it was a horror film. The chance meeting at the party. It was a setup. The long, interested conversations on our 3rd date, where he listened so intently as I talked about my mother. He was not listening, he was gathering information. The proposal in the park, the tears in his eyes, the 7-year marriage. It was not a relationship. It was a strategic, long-term assignment. I was not a wife. I was a target. My shaking hands set the photograph down. Next to it on the table was an old portable cassette player, the kind from the 1980s, and a stack of cassette tapes, each one meticulously labeled in Aunt Genevieve's precise script. I picked up the first tape in the stack. The label read, Liam Walker and Harrison Croft, March 2019, discussion of Caroline Hayes' investigation status. Harrison Croft. I knew that name. He was the CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals. I slid the tape into the player. My hand hovered over the play button, my thumb frozen, unwilling to take the final irreversible step. I was terrified. This was Liam's voice, the voice that had whispered, I love you, thousands of times, the voice that had comforted me after my mother died. My mind was screaming, pleading, please just let him be a weak, pathetic adulterer. Let him be a man who made a mistake. Do not let him be a monster. I pressed the button, a burst of static, a click, and then his voice. Caroline's getting too close, Liam said. I gasped. It was his voice, but it was not. It was a version I had never heard. It was cold, flat, and all business. It was the exact same tone he used when he was complaining about the monthly utility bills or discussing stock performance. He was discussing my mother as if she were a line item, a logistical problem on a spreadsheet. She's made copies of the trial data, he continued, and she's been meeting with someone at the FDA. There was a pause. I do not know who yet, but I'm working on finding out through Ilara. My stomach heaved. It's actually making my job harder because Ilara doesn't know anything useful. A second voice, older, deeper, and full of authority, responded. It had to be Harrison Croft. We can't let this go public, Croft said. The approvals we've secured are worth billions. Another pause. Then we need to consider other options, more permanent solutions. I slammed the pause button, my hand flying out as if to stop the words from physically hitting me. I could not breathe. I bent over, gasping for air in the cool, dry basement. Permanent solutions. They were talking about killing my mother. They were planning her murder. And Liam, my husband, the man I had loved, was an active, willing participant in the conversation. I forced myself to straighten up. I had to hear the rest. I pressed play again. There are ways to make it look accidental. Harrison Croft continued, his voice chillingly casual. We have people who specialize in this. Car accidents happen all the time, especially on rainy nights on dangerous roads. Nobody questions those. What about afterward? Liam asked. His voice was not fearful. It was practical, strategic. If Caroline dies, Ilara's going to be devastated. She'll lean on me for support, which gives me more access. He paused. But there's also that Aunt Helen, Genevieve. She's paranoid and suspicious of everything. Croft laughed, a short, dismissive bark. Let her ask, he said. Nobody takes Genevieve Vaughn seriously. She's been crying wolf about corporate corruption for decades. If she starts claiming Caroline's death wasn't an accident, people will just think she's being paranoid again. I sat there frozen as the tape hissed into silence. I found other tapes, dozens of them. I found the one that explained Chloe. It was a recording of her talking to her aunt, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a senior researcher at Meridian. The conversation was dated just weeks after my mother's funeral. They were discussing Chloe's new assignment. She had been officially tasked to befriend me, to get close to me, to become my new confidant now that my mother was gone. Her job was to monitor me, to listen to me, and to ensure that I remained isolated, grieving, and manageable. Every Thursday wine night, every shared secret, every hug when I cried. It was not friendship. It was surveillance. It was data collection. My entire life had been a cage. I do not know how long I sat in that cold, dry underground room, hours. My back ached from the concrete floor, and my eyes burned from reading document after document in the harsh LED light. I had listened to tapes that methodically rewrote my entire history. Finally, I turned my attention to the last item on the folding table. A laptop computer. It was plugged into a power strip fully charged. A yellow sticky note was attached to the screen. The handwriting was Aunt Genevieve's. "Play this first." On the desktop, there was a single video file labeled simply, "For Alara." My hand was shaking. I double-clicked it. The screen flickered, and then her face. Aunt Genevieve. She looked exactly as I remembered, yet terribly different. Her face was drawn, her skin pale, and she was wrapped in a thick cardigan. She was visibly terribly ill, but her eyes were the same. They were sharp, focused, and burned with an intensity that defied the sickness in her body. "Ilara," she began, her voice steady, "if you are watching this, it means I am dead." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "It means you found my archive, which means you are probably angry and confused and wondering why I did not tell you any of this while I was alive." She paused, taking a sip of water. "The answer is that I tried. I tried to warn you, Alara." My stomach clenched. I remembered. "At your engagement party, I pulled you aside and I told you to be careful. I told you something about Liam felt wrong." I had been mortified, apologizing to Liam for my crazy aunt. "You thought I was being paranoid," she said, a flicker of a sad smile on her face. "You told me I saw conspiracies everywhere, and I do not blame you for that. You had been taught your whole life by everyone in this family to dismiss me as difficult, to dismiss me as crazy." Her expression hardened. "Your mother, Caroline, was my best friend long before she was your mother. We grew up protecting each other. When she discovered what Meridian was doing, she came to me first. She came to me because she knew I was the only one who would help her document everything properly. We spent months building this case together, collecting the evidence you are sitting with right now." Her voice cracked just slightly. "And then she died. In that convenient, rainy night accident. And I knew exactly what they had done." She was seized by a sudden violent cough. It was a deep, racking sound that shook her small frame. She turned away from the camera, covering her mouth with a white tissue. When she turned back, she tried to hide it, but I saw it. I saw the bright, terrible splash of blood on the white fabric. My hand flew to my mouth. Oh God. She knew. She was dying. She knew she was running out of time, and she was spending her last precious months recording this for me. "I have spent the last 6 years of my life," she continued, catching her breath, "collecting this, every document, every recording. I did it because I loved your mother, and because I love you." Her eyes bored into the camera, and it felt as if she was in that cold room with me. "You have 2 choices, Alara, just like your mother had. You can take the money I left you and disappear. Change your name. Move somewhere far away, live quietly, and be safe. Nobody would blame you for choosing survival." She leaned forward. "Or you can fight. You can use everything I have collected, and you can burn these people to the ground. It will not be easy. They have money, they have lawyers, they have connections. You will be threatened, you will be harassed, you might be in danger. But Alara, if you fight, you might actually win." She smiled, that crooked smile I remembered from childhood. "Your mother would be proud of you no matter what you choose, but I think we both know which choice lets you sleep at night. I love you, Alara. Do not let them win." She started to reach for the camera to turn it off, then paused, as if remembering one last crucial detail. "Oh," she said, "and there is one more thing. Mountain Pacific Credit Union, account number 7743. I scrambled for a pen, my heart pounding. "The password is your mother's old employee number from Meridian. It is in the file labeled Caroline. That Alara is the real fortune. The $75,000 in the suitcase is just travel money. Use what is in that account to fight or use it to run, but for God's sake, use it." The screen went black. I sat in the buzzing silence for a full minute, the numbers repeating in my head. 7743. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling on the screen. I searched for the bank's number. I called. I navigated an automated menu before a polite, bored voice answered. I gave her the account number. The line went silent. It was silent for so long, I thought the call had dropped. "Ma'am," the woman said finally, her voice suddenly awake, crisp and intensely professional. "I am going to need to transfer you to our wealth management division. Please hold." Wealth management. The underwater-sounding piano hold music felt like it lasted for an eternity. "This is Patricia Jacobs with Wealth Management. How can I help you?" I explained, my voice shaking, that I was Alara Hayes and that my aunt had left me this account. "Yes, Ms. Hayes, I see the account here. I will need you to verify your identity. The password on the account is listed as your mother's employee number." I found the file, opened it, and read the number to her. Another long, agonizing pause. I could hear her typing. "Thank you, Ms. Hayes. That is correct," Ms. Jacobs said, her voice careful. "Your Aunt Genevieve Vaughn established this trust in your name 6 years ago. It contains significant stock portfolios, several real estate holdings, and intellectual property rights that your mother, Caroline Hayes, secured before her death." My mouth was dry. I do not understand. What does that mean, the value?" "Ms. Hayes," she said, "the total value of the trust as of the market's close yesterday is approximately $14 million. I hung up the phone. $14 million. I looked around the concrete bunker, at the tapes, the photos, the rows of files. Aunt Genevieve. She had not just left me evidence. She had not just left me a choice. She had left me a fully funded arsenal. She had spent 6 years building a war chest. She had armed me to the teeth. I stood up, my legs steady for the first time in months. I knew exactly what I had to do. I was done running. I was going to fight. I went back through the files, my mind racing. I was looking for a next step, a name, anything. Tucked inside the main file labeled Meridian was a single business card held by a paperclip. A name was circled twice in red ink: Agent Ava Diaz, FBI Portland Field Office. Beneath it, in Aunt Genevieve's sharp, precise script, were 2 words: "Trust her." This was it. This was the contact, the person my aunt and my mother had been working toward. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was not from fear or shock. It was focus. I took a deep, steadying breath, my phone feeling heavy in my hand. I dialed the number from the bunker. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice brisk, busy, and clipped with impatience. "Diaz." My throat was dry. My voice came out as a rasp. "My name is Alara Hayes." I said the words, feeling strange. "My aunt was Genevieve Vaughn." I paused, letting the name hang in the air. She left me some information regarding Meridian Pharmaceuticals." The line went completely, utterly silent. The high-strung, impatient energy I had heard in her voice vanished, replaced by an electric, absolute focus. I could hear the faint sound of her breathing. "Where are you right now?" she asked, her voice now low, intense, and deadly serious. "I am at her property," I said, "in Lake Oswego." "Do not leave," she commanded, her voice sharp. "Do not move. Do not talk to anyone else about this. Do not touch anything else. Lock the door you came in through. I am coming to you. I will be there in 40 minutes. She hung up before I could respond. I sat in the dusty, silent living room of my aunt's house, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I waited. I looked at the clock on the wall. She arrived in 35 minutes. A knock echoed through the dead house, sharp, official, and authoritative. I looked through the peephole. A woman in her mid-40s stood on the porch, her dark hair pulled back in a practical, tight ponytail. She wore jeans, a blazer, and an expression of profound, weary skepticism. She held up her badge to the peephole. Agent Ava Diaz. I opened the door. Her eyes swept over me, taking in my disheveled clothes, my exhausted, haunted expression. Her face was a hard mask, a mixture of deep, ingrained skepticism and the faintest, most dangerous flicker of hope. "Show me," she said. It was not a question. I did not say a word. I just nodded, led her through the cluttered house, out the back door, and across the overgrown yard to the shed. I unlocked the heavy industrial locks and pulled the door open. Her eyebrows shot up when she saw the pristine organization inside. I pointed to the floor. "It is down here." I pulled back the tarp, unlocked the trapdoor, and gestured down the ladder into the darkness. She went first, without a single word of hesitation. I followed her down into the climate-controlled bunker. I watched her face as the LED lights flickered on. The skepticism vanished, replaced by open, stunned disbelief. Then her expression hardened into one of pure, focused intensity. She pulled a pair of latex gloves from her pocket, snapped them on, and walked to the first filing cabinet. She pulled open a drawer. She read a file label. She pulled out a thick folder. She stood there under the harsh white light, and she read. She read for 20 solid minutes, her expression growing harder, colder, and more energized with every page she turned. Finally, she looked up at me, the folder still clutched in her gloved hand. "Your aunt," she said, her voice quiet with a kind of professional awe, "was either the most thorough investigator I have ever encountered in my entire career, or she was completely brilliant." She held up the file. "She was probably both. This is..." She shook her head as if clearing it. "This is enough to open a federal investigation. This is enough for conspiracy charges, massive fraud, and yes, Ms. Hayes, possibly murder if we can prove the car accident was arranged." She looked around the small concrete room at the rows of tapes, the indexed boxes, the photographs. "You just handed me a case that could take down a major pharmaceutical company," she said. My God, Genevieve, she was right all along. The investigation began immediately, but it moved with a maddening bureaucratic slowness that gnawed at my patience. Agent Diaz was my lifeline. She explained that subpoenas needed to be drafted, reviewed, and approved by judges. Warrants needed to be issued. Bank records needed to be frozen. It was a mountain of legal paperwork, all happening behind a wall of silence. Diaz helped me find a small one-bedroom apartment in an old anonymous building in Portland, paid for with the first wire transfer from the trust. "You are not safe at your aunt's house," she had said, her face grim. "Not anymore." So I lived, simply waiting. I met with federal prosecutors, serious men and women in dark suits who asked me the same questions over and over, their faces impassive. They wanted to know about Liam's schedule, about Chloe's visits, about my mother's behavior and state of mind in the months before she died. I answered them all, my voice a monotone, until my throat was raw. During that long, agonizing period of waiting, I had to go back to Genevieve's house one last time to retrieve some personal papers. The bunker had been sealed as an active crime scene by the FBI, but the house itself was just a sad, dusty shell. I was in the kitchen sorting through a box of what looked like junk when I found an old wooden recipe box. I opened it expecting notes on cookies or pies. Instead, tucked between a stained card for apple pie and pot roast was a single faded postcard. My breath caught. It was my mother's handwriting. It was addressed to Genevieve. The postmark was dated just 3 weeks before her accident. I turned it over. The message was short, scrawled in her familiar looping script, urgent and a little shaky. "Genevieve," it read, "you were right. I am being followed. Meridian is even dirtier than we imagined. I've started moving everything into the trust. I will talk to Alara as soon as she is safe. If something happens to me, do not let them win. Tell her I love her, and tell her to fight." I sank onto the dusty kitchen floor, my legs giving out, clutching the small piece of cardboard. The tapes in the bunker were the legal evidence. The $14 million was the arsenal. But this was the mandate. This was a voice from the grave, a personal command from my mother. It swept away any last lingering shred of fear or doubt. This was not about revenge for my ruined marriage anymore. This was not about Liam or Chloe or the money. This was about my mother. This was about finishing the fight she had died trying to win. For months, I lived in limbo. The grinding, bureaucratic slowness of the federal investigation was a new kind of torture. I lived in the small Portland apartment Agent Diaz had found for me, using the trust money to pay my rent, living simply waiting. I met with prosecutors. I repeated my story until the words lost all meaning. I was a ghost in my own life, waiting for the machinery of justice to finally start turning. Then, as if a dam had finally broken, Everything happened at once. It began on a Wednesday morning in early spring. I was drinking coffee, the local news on mute, when the screen suddenly filled with images that made my heart stop. The gleaming, arrogant glass tower of Meridian Pharmaceuticals headquarters. It was not a business report. It was a raid. Dozens of agents in blue FBI windbreakers were streaming out of the front lobby, carrying banker's box after banker's box, their faces grim and determined. Employees were clustered in the parking lot, confused and scared. It was the lead story on every national news channel. The coverage immediately cut to a live feed from a wealthy suburb. Harrison Croft, the CEO. The man whose voice I had heard on those tapes calmly discussing my mother's murder as a permanent solution. He was being led from his stone mansion in handcuffs. He was wearing a golf shirt and slacks. His face was a mask of cold reptilian arrogance, showing no visible emotion. Even as reporters shouted questions, he refused to answer. My phone rang, making me jump. It was Ava Diaz. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the electric current of victory running just beneath it. "We got him, Alara," she said, her voice sharp. "We arrested Liam Walker at his new office about 20 minutes ago." I watched the local news that evening, my hands clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. They had the footage. They showed Liam, my husband, the man I had loved, being walked out of a sleek, modern tech startup office. He maintained his composure, that familiar, infuriating arrogance. He walked with his head held high like this was all just a distasteful minor inconvenience. But I saw it. I replayed the footage 3-4 times. I saw the moment right before they put him in the car when his mask slipped. A flicker. A flash of pure, cold animal fear. The look of a man who genuinely, truly believed he was untouchable, only now realizing far too late that he was wrong. Chloe was arrested 2 days later. She had moved to Seattle using her blood money to start a small, legitimate-looking graphic design business. They arrested her at a trendy coffee shop laptop open, and the local news affiliate up there caught the footage. The reporter said she cried during her arrest. I watched the clip, and a single bitter, cold laugh escaped my lips. Tears. Of course she cried. She cried for herself. She cried when she was caught. Those tears were as fake and performative as the ones she had shed at my wedding. She had not shed a single genuine tear when she sat on that witness stand and calmly, methodically lied to destroy my life. But the biggest shock, the one that truly made the ground shift, came a week later. Judge Philip Monroe. The man who had looked at me with such disdain, who had rubber-stamped my legal execution. He abruptly resigned from the bench, issuing a terse public statement about wanting to spend more time with his family. That old, tired, guilty man's excuse. It did not work. 3 weeks later, he was indicted. Aunt Genevieve's files, it turned out, were perfect. They included financial records that showed the purchase of a lavish vacation home in Arizona, bought through a complex shell trust that the FBI's forensic accountants had patiently, meticulously traced directly back to a Meridian Pharmaceuticals executive slush fund. The fallout for me was immediate. All of Judge Monroe's recent cases were put under immediate high-priority review. Mine was first. Ava Diaz called me again. "It is over, Alara," she said. "Your marriage to Liam is being annulled. Not finalized as a divorce. The court is declaring it invalid from the beginning on the grounds of profound fraud." A few days later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my apartment. It was on heavy, embossed cardstock, bearing the official seal of the state judicial system. It was a formal letter of apology. It was 2 pages of careful, dense legal language, acknowledging that I had been subjected to proceedings that were fundamentally compromised by corruption and fabricated testimony. It expressed deep regret for the harm caused by a system that had failed to protect me from coordinated fraud. I read the letter once, standing in my small Portland kitchen. Then I read it again. It did not erase the months I had spent sleeping on couches, feeling like a toxic burden. It did not erase the shame of paying Brenda, that weekly motel rate in crumpled, sweaty bills. It did not erase the smell of room 14. But it was acknowledgement. It was the official, undeniable, permanent proof written in their own language on their own letterhead. I was not crazy. I was not unstable. And I was not paranoid. The arrests were just the beginning. The real war, the war of attrition, was the trials. Agent Diaz had warned me that cases this complex, this massive, moved with agonizing slowness. She was right. The process dragged on for 1.5 grueling years. It was a marathon of legal procedures, motions delays, and endless meticulous preparation. Harrison Croft's trial was first. It was exactly what you would expect. A complete media circus. The downtown federal courthouse was besieged by satellite trucks and reporters, all shouting questions as Croft arrived every morning, his face a mask of cold indifference, flanked by a team of lawyers who looked like they cost more than my entire former life. I was there. I sat in the back row in the public gallery every single day. I wore simple, unremarkable clothes. I looked like a law student or just a curious member of the public. I was anonymous. It was the perfect vantage point. The prosecution, armed with Aunt Genevieve's perfect archive and the FBI's meticulous follow-up, was relentless. They built the case brick by damning brick. They called former Meridian whistleblowers to the stand. I watched a nervous middle-aged lab technician describe the internal system of burying negative trial data, his voice shaking as he pointed at Croft and identified him as the man who approved the policy. They called the forensic accountants. They put up complex charts that turned the fraud into a simple, devastating roadmap showing how the money from the fraudulent drug approvals flowed through a dozen shell accounts, ultimately landing in executive bonuses, with the largest share by far going directly to Harrison Croft. But the moment that sealed his fate, the moment the jury's mask of neutrality finally cracked, was the victim testimony. They called a woman to the stand, a quiet mother from Ohio. Her name was Mary. She spoke in a low, steady, heartbreaking voice about her daughter Emily, who had died at age 19 from liver failure. She had been taking a new Meridian drug for a minor ailment, a drug that Mary now knew, that the whole courtroom now knew, had been rushed to market with falsified safety data. She held up a small framed photo of a smiling girl in a graduation cap. "He knew," she said, her voice clear and strong, looking directly at Harrison Croft. "They knew it was dangerous, and they sold it anyway. My daughter is dead because of his bonus." Croft just stared straight ahead, unmoved. The jury deliberated for 6 long days. When they returned, the air in the courtroom was so thick I could barely breathe. The foreman stood. "On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find guilty? On the count of securities fraud, how do you find guilty? On the count of reckless endangerment, guilty." On and on it went. 17 counts, 17 guilty verdicts. Guilty. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. Harrison Croft, still showing no visible emotion, stood as the judge read his fate. The judge called his actions a profound betrayal of the public trust and an act of staggering sociopathic greed. He sentenced him to 23 years in federal prison. He was 63 years old. It was effectively a life sentence. The judge also ordered the forfeiture of approximately $40 million in personal assets. I sat in the back row, my hands clasped in my lap. I watched the bailiffs move in cuff, his hands behind his back, and lead him away. I did not feel joy. I did not feel the triumphant, fist-pumping satisfaction I had expected. I just felt balance. It was not a celebration. It was the cold, quiet click of a heavy lock finally falling into place. It was the closing of a long, terrible ledger. It was the resolution of a mathematical equation that had been deliberately, cruelly miscalculated for years. This was for my mother. This was for Mary's daughter, Emily. This was for every single person Harrison Croft had viewed as nothing more than a statistic, a rounding error on his path to wealth. Liam's trial was next. It was a smaller affair held in a different, less crowded courtroom. There was no national media, just a few local reporters. This was not about corporate malfeasance. This was about murder. And for me, this was personal. I was there every day. Same seat, back row, a silent, watchful presence. Liam sat at the defendant's table looking thinner, the arrogance he wore like armor now dented and tarnished. He still had a private lawyer, though a much cheaper one than Victoria Blackwood. The prosecutors presented Aunt Genevieve's perfect, damning evidence. They laid out his entire life with me as a 7-year intelligence gathering operation. They detailed his role in monitoring my mother. They explained his participation in the planning of her murder. And then they played the tapes. The courtroom was completely deathly silent, and then his voice, Liam's voice. The voice that had read to me, that had sung off-key in the shower, that had whispered, "I love you," in the dark. That same familiar voice now filled the sterile room, cold, clinical, and unrecognizable. The jury listened, their faces hardening as they heard him discuss my mother's death as a problem. They heard him call Aunt Genevieve paranoid. They heard him suggest ways to manage my grief, my devastation, to gain more access. Then they played the bank records. A slide appeared on the screen showing a monthly recurring payment from a Meridian Shell Corporation into a private account in Liam's name. A payment that had started 2 years before we met and had continued like a salary for every single month of our 7-year marriage. He was not just a husband, he was an employee. I was his full-time job. His defense attorney tried feebly to argue that Liam was a low-level participant, that he was a young man manipulated by powerful older figures like Harrison Croft, that he had been coerced, scared, and did not understand the full scope of the conspiracy. The prosecutor stood up for his rebuttal. He simply smiled at the jury. "Let's play one more tape," he said. And he played the clip where Liam himself enthusiastically suggested ways to handle my mother, the clip where he was the one strategizing, not the one being coerced. The defense attorney sat down. The jury returned in less than 3 hours. Guilty. Guilty on all charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and racketeering. The judge was swift. "Mr. Walker, you have betrayed every conceivable human decency." He sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison. As the bailiff moved to cuff him, Liam's head snapped up. He searched the courtroom, his eyes frantic. He found me. He stared at me from across the room. His expression was not one of remorse. It was not one of apology. It was a complex, toxic brew of pure, unadulterated anger and baffled resignation. He was looking at me as if I was the one who had done this to him, as if I was the one who had betrayed him. I looked back, my face perfectly calm, my hands steady. I held his gaze. I did not blink. I did not cry. I felt nothing. No hate, no love, no pity. Just empty. "You are looking at me like I am the one who destroyed you." I thought the words as clear in my head as if I had spoken them aloud. "But you did this to yourself. You chose her. You chose the money. You chose to murder my mother, and your biggest mistake, your one fatal arrogant error, was that you underestimated me." He kept staring, waiting for me to break, to cry, to give him any emotion at all. I gave him one. I nodded, just once. A slow, deliberate, final acknowledgement. It was not forgiveness. It was not closure. It was confirmation. Yes, it is done. I stood up, turned my back on him, and walked out of the courtroom. I did not look back. Chloe Reed, my former best friend, never went to trial. She was the last piece of the conspiracy to fall, and she did it in the most predictable way. She saved herself. Faced with the mountain of evidence from Aunt Genevieve's archive, she accepted a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she agreed to testify against everyone else. She turned on her own aunt, Dr. Evelyn Reed, providing the prosecution with the internal links they needed to secure a conviction against her. She provided information on a half-dozen other Meridian employees who had been part of the cover-up. She was in the end a prolific traitor. Her sentence was reduced to 8 years in federal prison. About 6 months after her sentencing, a letter arrived at my Portland apartment. The return address was a federal correctional facility for women. It was from Chloe. I sat at my small kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, and I read it. It was 3 pages long, written on thin prison-issue stationery. It was exactly what I expected it to be. It was not an apology. It was a masterpiece of self-pity and calculated justification. She wrote that she was so young and desperate for money when Meridian first approached her. She wrote about the terrible choices she regretted every single day. Then came the part that was meant to wound me, the part that was designed as a final manipulative twist of the knife. She wrote that our friendship started as just a job, but became complicated because she had actually grown to care about me, despite the lies. She wrote that our Thursday nights had meant something real to her, even if they were built on a foundation of deception. She ended the letter by asking if someday when she got out, we could find a way to talk, to find forgiveness, and to move forward. I read the letter once, then a second time, just to be sure. I felt nothing. No anger, no surge of old pain, just a cold, hollow satisfaction. I saw the letter for exactly what it was. It was not a confession. It was self-justification dressed up in the language of remorse. It was an attempt one last time to rewrite the history of our relationship so that she could see herself as a victim of circumstance rather than what she was, an active, willing, and compensated participant in the systematic destruction of another person's life. She did not regret the betrayal. She only regretted getting caught. She was not asking for my forgiveness. She was demanding absolution. She wanted me to reply to say, "It's okay, Chloe," so that she could sleep better in her prison cell. She wanted me to validate her, to tell her that our friendship was real. She wanted me to make her feel better. I stood up, calmly folded the 3 pages, and slid them into a manila folder. I picked up a black marker and wrote one word on the tab: evidence. I filed the letter away in the back of my desk drawer with all the other documents of my old life, and I never responded. Some relationships cannot be repaired, and they should not be. Forgiveness is not a debt you owe to the people who tried to bury you. The criminal trials were over, but the financial war continued. The civil lawsuit against Meridian Pharmaceuticals, filed on behalf of the thousands of patients they had harmed, dragged on for another 2 years. The company fought it, deploying a fresh army of impossibly expensive lawyers to challenge every claim and delay every proceeding. But in the end, facing the combined weight of the criminal convictions and the irrefutable evidence from Aunt Genevieve's archive, they were forced to settle. The terms were staggering. Meridian was required to pay $2.7 billion into a fund for the patients and families they had harmed with their fraudulent drugs. They were forced to fund independent third-party safety reviews of every single medication they had brought to market in the past decade. And the company was placed under strict federal monitoring for 15 years. As part of the settlement, my mother's estate received $12 million in wrongful death damages. As her only living relative, I inherited every single dollar of it. The money appeared in my account, a staggering, impossible number. I looked at it for one full day. It felt dirty. It felt like the price they had put on my mother's life. It was tainted. I already had the $14 million from Aunt Genevieve's trust, a war chest built on love and foresight. This new money, this $12 million, was built on murder and greed. The next day, I called my financial advisor. I had him donate every single cent of it, splitting the $12 million between organizations that advocate for pharmaceutical safety and whistleblower protection. I did not use the $12 million of blood money, but I had a different fund. A $14 million war chest built on foresight and love. I used a significant portion of Aunt Genevieve's trust to establish the Vaughn Foundation. The name was a tribute, a way to honor both my mother, Caroline Hayes, and the woman who had avenged her, Genevieve Vaughn. Its mission was simple, aggressive, and exactly what they both would have wanted. It is a nonprofit organization dedicated to investigating pharmaceutical fraud, and most importantly, supporting the whistleblowers who risk their careers and their lives to expose corporate misconduct. This became my life. My full-time work, my purpose. It was a way to channel the cold, hard rage I still felt and the profound grief that still lived in my bones into something productive, something that would have made my mother and my aunt proud. We hired former FBI forensic accountants, the best in the business. We funded the legal defenses for employees who were facing retaliation and harassment after reporting safety problems. We published deeply researched, meticulously documented reports that made pharmaceutical companies and their shareholders profoundly uncomfortable. We shone a bright, unforgiving light into the dark corners where they preferred to operate. I had taken the legacy of secrecy and lies that had been forced upon me and turned it into a legacy of radical, aggressive transparency. I still think about room 14 at the Crossroads Motel sometimes. The memory is not fuzzy, it is sharp and clear. I remember the exact sickly smell of the industrial cleaner failing to cover the cigarette smoke. I remember the feeling of the sagging mattress springs digging into my back. I remember the taste of the $2 instant ramen and the feel of the flimsy plastic fork in my hand. I remember the desperation, the crushing absolute and total belief that my life was over. I keep the receipt, the final faded thermal paper receipt from my last week at the motel. I paid for it in crumpled cash. I keep it folded in my wallet right behind my new driver's license. It is not a trophy. It is a reminder. It is my proof that rock bottom is a real place. It is a reminder that humiliation, betrayal, and coordinated cruelty can strip away everything you thought defined you. Your job, your home, your marriage, your friends, they can take all of it. But they cannot destroy you. They cannot touch the core of who you are unless you let them. Aunt Genevieve had understood that. She had been right all along. The paranoid aunt, the difficult woman, the eccentric family member everyone dismissed as crazy, had been the only one who truly understood how the world actually worked. She knew that powerful people and powerful corporations do not stop being corrupt just because you are a good person. They do not follow the rules just because you do. She recognized that loyalty and trust are weapons to be used against you by those who have none. The final essential truth she had left me proved to be prophetic in ways I am still discovering every day. Fighting does not always lead to winning. It is not a guarantee. But not fighting. Not fighting guarantees that you will lose. They count on your silence. They count on your shame. They count on you being too broken to ever stand up. I had chosen to stand up. I have a new life now. It is nothing like the perfect, stable, middle-class life I had with Liam. It is not simple. It is messy, and it is complicated, and it is often very, very difficult. But it is fundamentally, completely, and beautifully honest. I built it. I built it from the ruins of the fraudulent, hollow life they had constructed for me. I am not the woman I was when I found that suitcase under the motel bed. I am not her anymore, and I am grateful for that. That woman was trusting. That woman was naive. That woman thought that playing by the rules would protect her. I am stronger than she was. I am more careful. I am more cautious about who I trust, and I am far more certain about what actually matters. That woman, the one eating ramen in room 14, had no idea what she was capable of surviving. She had no idea how much strength was buried deep inside her waiting. She thought she was destroyed. She did not realize she was just being cleared away, making room for the person she was about to become. Lesson learned. The world is quick to label a woman betrayed by her husband as broken or lost. But betrayal is a fire that burns away the trivial, leaving only the essential. True strength is not the absence of pain, but the process of metabolizing it into purpose. For a woman who has seen the person she trusted most become her destroyer, justice is not just a legal outcome. It is the quiet, deliberate act of rebuilding a life on her own terms, a life they never believed she was capable of. Peace is not given. It is forged.